Hello there, once again, welcome to our science lesson. I hope you are enjoying every bit of our science lesson because it's actually touching the real life situations. We are looking at the human body as a whole, which represents the multicellular organism. Just to jog your mind a little bit, we began from requirements of life. But we said the requirements of life are supposed to drive several metabolism in our bodies. But the body as a whole has several systems, as we have already pointed out. We have looked at systems, very many of them. But again, we said that these systems cannot work just on their own. They have to be coordinated in a way. That's why we have been looking at nervous system on a very clear point, so that now in the nervous system we said it is the one that is going to coordinate and control all activities of the body systems. Remember, if we have, for instance, digestive system, which allow food moving from digestive system to respiratory system, or gas molecule, for instance, oxygen, moving from the respiratory system to muscular system, where we have respiration taking place, and several other mechanisms that must be coordinated in our bodies. But again, for the nervous system to work very well, we said it usually has the structural and functional unit, which is the nervous system or the nerve cell. Now, if you look at the nerve cell, it cannot work alone again without specialized or group of nerve cells that are usually associated together to form very important structures called the sense organs. Now, remember, in our last lesson, we were looking at sense organs. A human being has 5 major senses. You can remind me, or just you can note somewhere if you have a paper. I'm giving you 2 seconds. Yes, you have done it. We have the eye or sight. We have a sense for hearing. We have the tongue for taste. We have the nose for smell, and the skin for several detection of several stimuli like pain, pressure, touch. It can be able to detect those type of senses. So today I want to summarize a little bit of sense organs and then move to the nerve cells because they are very important. So we are going to use this question to summarize the 5 sense organs. Summarize the 5 sense organs. So we have already mentioned some of the stimulus in relation to the 5 sense organs. So we shall use a table. We have the sense organ, and then another column will represent the stimulus, and the other part will represent just a reminder to remember some parts of those sense organs. Parts of sense organs. So again, this is an activity that should be interactive. Sense organs. Now you are looking at me wherever you are. You are using a given or a particular sense organ. Which one is that one? Yes, I know you in your mind, or if you are very close to me, you could have said the eye. So the first sense organ is the eye. So for you to see, we must have a very important stimulus. The change in the environment. What is it? It's supposed to be light. So the stimulus is light. Remember, we said the stimulus is that change in the environment. Now, for instance, light. If you are in a room, you can switch on and off the lights. If you switch off the lights, you cannot be able to distinguish several objects that are around you. So the stimulus here is light. Parts of the eye, you can remember some. Remember, we had parts like the cornea. We have parts like the lens, parts like the iris. We have others. We are just mentioning the major parts. We have parts like the retina. Remember, the retina is that layer of the eye that contains photoreceptor cells. We have the fovea. Remember fovea? The fovea, that curved inner part of the retina that has high concentration of cones for purpose of light vision. And then blind spot. Blind spot. Can you remember blind spot? Yes. Blind spot, just like the term suggests, blind, where we have the nerve cells or the optic nerve, the blood vessels joining the eyeball. And because that point does not contain or does not have photoreceptors, when an image lands at the blind spot, it is not going to be perceived because it is lacking cones and rods. So we have several parts, but we are just going to mention but a few. Then again, I should also remind you that you are getting me when I speak. I'm speaking from this end, but wherever you are getting my voice, or you are getting the sound so that you can learn. So what organ or sense organ are you using to get my voice or to distinguish it? Yes, I know you have already said the ear. Wherever you are, it is the ear. The stimulus for the ear. What will make you know that there's a change in the environment if you are using your ear alone? That sound. There is sound. Maybe wherever you are, we have other sources of sounds. So maybe somebody is walking somewhere around your room, or there is a vehicle on the road nearby. It is producing some sound. So sound is the stimulus. Parts of the ear, you can remember some. The outer part, this funnel-shaped structure, you can find out that we gave it a name called what? Pinna. And then pinna was leading into another column that connects the pinna and the eardrum. That was the ear canal. Ear canal. We also gave it another name. The other name was auditory canal. We have eardrum, where the sound wave strikes, and then they are transformed from from sound waves to sound vibrations. And then from eardrum, we have the tiny bones in the ear that usually, when struck with sound vibrations, they amplify the sound vibrations. You can remember them. We were calling them ear ossicles. Ear ossicles. And then now it gets into the cochlea, and then back through the oval window. Those are the major sites, although we have other parts like the eustachian tube that balances air pressure between outside and the middle ear. You can remember that one. The other sense organ, now if for instance you woke up in the morning, the first thing that you'll do, maybe you'll take a bath, it depends, but sometime you'll take breakfast. Suppose you wanted to take breakfast with coffee. You'll want your coffee not to be flat. You'll add there some sugar. So it is the tongue that will be involved in finding out whether you have put there the right quantity of sugar or not. So the tongue. But remember also we said that the tongue, the stimulus, whatever you are putting in the mouth, there are several, is a complex group of substances. So most of them are in form of chemicals. So it's the chemicals. Could be sugar, could be salt, could be pepper, could be any other thing. So most of them, we group them as chemicals, the parts of the tongue. We found out that on the tongue we have a groove, and on that groove, or in that groove, we have some sensitive cells that are able to detect the chemicals, the chemoreceptors. Those chemoreceptors are located into cells or structures called the taste buds. So the taste buds are the major structure on the tongue. Taste buds located in the grooves. The other part related to tongue, as you are tasting food, sometimes it comes with an aroma or some good odor. Those are, that is, the other part is the nose. The nose. In the nose, again, chemicals are detected. It could be from the mouth. Maybe you have taken food through your mouth, and then the chemicals are detected, or through the air, through diffusion. Chemicals. Remember we said in this we have, in the nose we have those cells that detect odor or smell. We call them olfactory cells. Olfactory cells. And then the last sense organ, we have major 5 of them. Skin. And as we were looking at the skin, we described the skin as the largest organ. And because it is the largest organ, the stimulus are usually varied stimuli. For instance, when you say varied, for instance, we have touch. If somebody touches or places a hand on you, you'll be able to feel, because we have sense organ for touch. Pressure, pain, even heat, the thermoreceptors. So under the skin is mainly sensitive cells, sensitive or sensory nerve endings. Sensory nerve endings. These nerve endings are located closer to the surface of the skin. To skin surface. So that any change in the environment can easily be detected. So these are the major sense organs. These are the stimulus or the stimulus. The stimuli, if there are many, and indeed there are many, and these are the major parts. So let us move on to nerve cells, because these sense organs, as we have mentioned, they cannot function without nerve cells. It's the nerve cells that will be either sending impulses to the brain, and then brain now releases motor responses back to effector organs. So let us look at the nerve cells. Now remember, in our previous lesson, it's not the first time you are coming across the nerve cells. They're important because their major function is for transmission of nerve impulses around the body. When the eye receives light, we are going to have sensory cells in the eye that will be stimulated. But that nerve impulse that has been stimulated will have to travel to the brain or be transmitted to the brain through these structures, the nerve cells, and then back again to the eye or any other parts of the body through the nerve cells. That's why nerve cells are described as the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system. So we have said they carry their main role. They carry nerve impulses around the body. They carry nerve impulses around the body. They carry nerve impulses around the body. Now, previously we identified nerve cells as just normal cells, but they are specialized, they are modified so that they can function, they can be able to carry out the role of transmission of nerve impulses. So how is this nerve cell? It's just a specialized cell, but because it's specialized, it will have some structures that other animal cells are lacking. For instance, it will have a part called a dendrite, so that it receives impulses, a cell body, and an axon. So nerve cells are specialized cells. Specialized cells with or made of structures called dendrites, axon, and cell body. Now let us just review again the structure of a nerve cell, typical structure. Let us, for instance, use a nerve cell called motor neuron. Now this is just a simplified structure of a nerve cell, a typical one. But the specific name of this is called a motor neuron. We are going to look at three types that is. So this part here is called cell body. Cell body. And this long extension is called the axon. Inside the axon, we have a medium, fluid medium called axoplasm. And then on top of that axon, we have a cell called the Schwann cell. Schwann cell usually secretes a fat material. That fat material is called the myelin sheath. So that layer that covers the axon, that layer that's covering with some proper intervals, 1 millimeter intervals along it. We call it the myelin sheath. And then we have projections at both ends of the nerve cell. So those projections are called dendrites. In fact, dendrites are very important because they receive impulses either from the receptor, for instance, we are going to look at it, or from another neuron. So we have two types of dendrites. These dendrites on that end, and then you also have dendrites here at that point. So depending on the direction of nerve impulse, we have terminal dendrites and receptor dendrites, the one that receive. For this case, the impulse moves from this direction of the cell body, toward this direction. So the dendrites here will be receiving impulses, from an adjacent neuron. That small mark there showing an adjacent neuron. So it receives. So because it receives, we call this dendrite as receptor dendrite. Receptor dendrites. Now, this is the direction of the movement of the nerve impulse from the cell body to this direction. So this is where the impulse terminates or ends. And since the impulse ends at that point, we call them terminal dendrites toward the end. So this is some of the structures of a nerve cell. Now we can look at briefly the functions of several parts of this nerve cell. So one part, as we have already mentioned, we have this part, dendrite or dendrites. The role of dendrites is simply to receive impulses. Receives impulses majorly from an adjacent. Although this role could vary depending on the position of the dendrite. If it is, for instance, in the cell body, it will be receiving. But if it's at the end, for instance, motor neuron, there will be terminal dendrites so that it lets that impulse either get to the effector, if it is a relay neuron, to another neuron. Other parts include axon. The role of axon is for transmission of nerve impulse. But remember, for this to happen, axon has cytoplasm-like material called axoplasm. So the axoplasm forms a medium. It is found in the axon, forms a medium for transmission of the nerve impulses. It's a medium for transmission of impulses, nerve impulses. But just something to mention about axoplasm. It's a medium, yes, but what is the real composition? Some or very important composition of the axoplasm include ions. These ions, major one is sodium ions and chlorite ions. Chlorite ion, potassium ion. So, of course, with water as a medium for the ionic phases of the salt to exist. So these ions are the ones that are involved in transmission of nerve impulses. So that's why if, for example, you are injected with high concentration of sodium chloride, you become very sensitive. If somebody touches you, you'll become more sensitive. Even pain becomes more painful because of high concentration of sodium and chloride ions in your nervous system. Because when there are more, it means there is high rate of transmission of the nerve impulses. Other parts, number 3, we have the Schwann cell. Schwann cell. Schwann cell is just found located on top of the axon. The role of Schwann cell is to secrete the myelin sheath. Secretes myelin sheath. Then for myelin sheath itself, myelin sheath is myelin sheath is made of fat, so it's a fatty layer. This is a fatty layer covering the axon. So the role of the myelin sheath, because it's fatty, is to prevent leakage of nerve impulses out of the axon. So that now we have impulses being maintained or contained within the axon. Otherwise, we have several of nerve cells, sensory, motor, relay. If you are going to have messages in form of impulses getting out of the axon, myelin sheath is a fatty layer that covers the axon. And the major role is to prevent leakages of impulses from the axon. Suppose we have, for example, a case where impulses are getting out of the axon. The nerve cells are so many, maybe crisscrossing. What will happen is that messages will be merging such that now the real impulse cannot be able to be interpreted by the brain. There will be a mix-up. There will be mixing up of the impulses. In the end, it will bring about confusion to the brain. The other parts, as the other part of the nerve is the cell body, which we did not mention maybe. Cell body. The role of cell body is to controls activities. activity of the nerve impulse, or the nerve cell, that is nerve cell, not nerve impulse. And the last part are the nodes of Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier. Maybe on our diagram we didn't show this, but we can just review it again. So we said on this axon we have intervals, millimeter intervals like that along the axon, but embedded in the myelin sheath. So those gaps found in the myelin sheath, the gaps in the myelin sheath are the one that we call nodes of Ranvier. How are they important? Now, for impulses to be transmitted along the axon, we shall have changes in the concentration of ions, sodium, potassium, chloride ions. But the changes in the concentration usually happens across the membrane of the axon. So most of the impulse is usually carried along the membrane. So if we have a point where maybe there is some gap like that one, what will happen is that nerve impulse will skip in quads, or a very good word, jump in quads. A situation where there's jumping, even when you are moving and you are jumping at a faster rate. If you have ever looked at maybe through movie or a real situation where maybe a kangaroo is moving, kangaroo usually moves by jumping. When the higher the speed of jumping, the more the speed of movement. So as it jumps across those gaps, the nodes of Ranvier, it will be speeding up the rate of transmission. So the role of nodes of Ranvier is to speed up the rate of transmission of nerve impulses. Speeds up transmission of nerve impulses. Nerve impulses. Then briefly, types of nerve cells. Types of nerve cells. One, we have mentioned several. One of them is sensory neuron. Sensory neuron. So the term neuron has several ways of presenting it. You can either write it that way, or you can write neurons. Neuron that way. You add an E or just a single N, an N with an E or a single N at the end. So sensory neuron, I think we have already come across it. Sensory neuron, just like any other typical neuron, it will have an axon, and then of this axon, just as it gets into the central nervous system, we are going to have this part that we shall give a name, and then it has obvious the myelin sheath. Myelin sheath like that. This is the axon. Now this is the cell body, but this part on the axon where the cell body is located closer to it is the one that gets into the central nervous system. So this part will be in the central nervous system. So we shall call those dendrites. Dendrites are in this position and on that position. But depending on the direction of dendrites, direction of the nerve impulse, we can give the dendrites a name, either terminal or receptor. So impulse will be received at that point. So we call this one as receptor dendrites. It will travel along the sensory neuron, the axon, into the central nervous system. So because these dendrites are in the central nervous system, we shall call this one as terminal dendrites. So if we look at it carefully, we can easily give some of the structural characteristic of sensory neuron. One, look at the position of the cell body. Position of the cell body is off the axon. It's not along or at the end, but off the axon. Cell body located off the axon. Indeed, you can see it's not along. And then you can also look at the position of the cell body. Cell body is not positioned or located in the central nervous system, outside. Cell body found outside central nervous system, CNS. And then there is also something else that we need to know, that it has this layer, myelin sheath. It has a myelin sheath. So it is myelinated. It is myelinated. It is myelinated. In other words, it has a myelin sheath. So function of the sensory neuron, sense organ. So it is the one that will be in, there will be so many sensory neuron in sense organ. The eye, the skin, we shall have several of them. So it means it's the one that will take nerve impulse from sense organ or receptors in this position, transmission of nerve impulse from receptors to central nervous system. So the direction is this, as I've already shown, from receptors. Then the impulse gets to receptor dendrites along the axon into central nervous system. So the function of sensory neuron is to transmit nerve impulse from receptors to central nervous system. For transmission of nerve impulses from receptors. Receptors are found in sense organ. For example, under the skin we have thermoreceptors. When it is hot, you can get that it is hot, or you can detect that it's hot. We have pain receptors. If you step on a sharp object, it is the receptors. Pain receptors will be stimulated, generate a nerve impulse, and then it goes to the central nervous system through sensory neuron. So for transmission of nerve impulse from receptors to central nervous system. So a slight question, where do you think central nervous system is located? We have two parts of our body. It's found in the brain and in the spinal cord. That is that makes the central nervous system. Central nervous system made up of two parts, brain and the spinal cord. The other neuron is motor neuron. Just a sketch very fast. We already have this, so I'll use a sketch of that manner. It has myelin sheath. So inside is axoplasm. This is the myelin sheath. This cell body. And then depending on the direction of the nerve impulse, we can name the type of dendrites, either terminal or receptor. So you'll also do this with me. Now the direction, this cell body is located in the central nervous system. So after the impulse gets from receptors into the brain or the spinal cord, it will go back to another structure that will respond now. The skin has sensed that there is high temperature in this room. You will do some few things. You can move out of the room. But before that one happens, the message goes to the central nervous system through sensory neuron, and then back to some muscles of your leg, so that now you can relax and contract to take you out of that room. So the one that takes message back to your muscles so that it takes you out of the room is the motor neuron. So the direction is this. If I have that direction, then you can help me label these dendrites. We have two types of dendrites, terminal and receptor. A message is coming from central nervous system to get into the motor neuron. Therefore, this dendrite receives. If it receives, then we call this one as receptor dendrite, or dendrites if there are many. And then now it terminates into an organ, the muscle or a gland. We call this one as terminal dendrite. So we have several other structures that are very similar to sensory neuron, myelin sheath, and several. So from this, we can now look at the features of motor neuron. We can start by cell body. Where is the cell body? Location of cell body at the end of the motor neuron. Cell body located at end of the neuron. Where is the exact position of cell body? Is it outside or within the central nervous system? You can see my demarcation of central nervous system is this. Cell body found within the central nervous system. Cell body found within central nervous system. I'll use CNS to show central nervous system. Another thing or another characteristic that you can look at, is presence of myelin sheath. Is it there? Yes, it has a myelin sheath. Therefore, we say it is myelinated. it is myelinated. Myelinated. In other words, it has a myelin sheath. These are the main features. Look at the role. Transmission of nerve impulse from central nervous system to receptors, to effectors, that is, to effectors. So you can make that note together with you. So the role is to transmit nerve impulses from CNS to effectors. What are these effectors? Effectors are those structures within the that form part of the central nervous system which are responsible for response. They are the one that responds. Brain has executed a command. That command has gone to a gland like adrenal gland. So adrenal gland will secrete a hormone, adrenaline. So adrenal gland becomes the effector. The muscle becomes the effector. You have seen food and the food looks very delicious. What will happen? Salivary glands will have to execute the command of the brain by increasing saliva in your mouth, salivation. So that those are the effectors. Number 3, nerve cell number 3 is connector neuron. Also called intermediate or relay neuron. It is a connector because it connects to nerve cells, motor neuron and sensory neuron. Relay, again, if you are a fan of athletics, you realize that we also have a type of event, track event called relays. Relays, you hand over a baton to another. If it is 100 by 4 or 200, 400 by 4, something like that. So a relay neuron, simply, if I may use that simple structure, relay neuron has a cell body. That's our cell body. But this cell body is found along the axon. As axon. These are dendrites. So depending on the position of sensory, if sensory neuron is here and motor neuron at that point, impulse will move from sensory neuron to this dendrites. So this one becomes receptor dendrites. And then it will get out of this connector neuron to motor neuron through this dendrite. So this one shall be called terminal dendrite. If that's our direction. But it can change. So the structure of relay neuron is just similar to that one of sensory and motor neuron. But the difference is, look at my diagram, there's something that is not there, that's lacking. That was present in sensory, was present in motor neuron. That is the myelin sheath. So connector neuron lacks the myelin sheath. And the entire relay neuron is found in the central nervous system. So in terms of features, we can look at several parts. Cell body, as we have been referring to, position of cell body found along the neuron. Position of the cell body. Cell body is found along the axon. Indeed, you can, from the diagram, it is showing. And then look at the position of cell body vis-a-vis the entire. So the rest, the entire neuron, relay neuron, is found in the central nervous system. Entire neuron is found in the CNS, central nervous system. A very important feature that we have also looked at is whether there is presence or absence of myelin sheath. And indeed, it is non-myelinated. It has no myelin sheath. It is non-myelinated. In other words, there is no myelin sheath. And then the role of connector neuron. From the word itself, connector, it connects to neuron, relaying impulses between sensory and motor neuron. So, in terms of function, it is for transmission of nerve impulse, for transmission of impulses, between neurons. Between neurons. So in other words, if we had to connect the three neurons, this is how it will look like. We shall have so this is how it will be. This one is sensory neuron. In between the two neurons, we have our neuron that we have mentioned, connector neuron. And now we have this motor neuron. So the three neurons must work always together. Now, if this is the receptor organ, if that is the receptor organ, skin, for instance, e.g. skin, you touch a hot object, receptor cells in the receptor organ, it will be stimulated, a nerve impulse will be generated, and then it will flow in this direction into the central nervous system. And then in between these two neurons, we have now the connector neuron. It will allow transmission of impulse from sensory neuron to motor neuron in that direction. And then now from central nervous system to outside the central nervous system to effector organs. Effector organ. A very good example are the muscles. muscles become the effector organs. So you have stepped or touched a hot object using your hand. Impulse has been generated using receptor cells. It has been transmitted along sensory neuron to the central nervous system, and in between the motor and sensory neuron, impulse has been transmitted via or through relay neuron or connector neuron to motor neuron, then to effector organ, and then a response is going to be generated depending on what the brain executed or what the brain interpreted. So we have some structures here that will be found in the central nervous system. So these dendrites of sensory neuron, what we call terminal, will be found in the central nervous system. Entire connector neuron is found in the central nervous system. The cell body of motor neuron is found in the central nervous system. So you can see that some structures of these neurons will be found within the central nervous system, and with a very special case where the connector neuron, the entire part of it, is found in the central nervous system. So that will be the flow of the impulse. But there is something worth noting, that there is a gap between sensory neuron, you can see that, and connector neuron. There's also a gap between the dendrites of connector neuron and dendrite of the motor neuron. So the question is, how then do we have transmission of impulses across that gap? And what is the name of that gap? That gap there is given this name called synapse. It is the synapse. So in our next lesson, we are going to look at how impulses will move across the synapse. So that synapse is simply a junction between dendrites of adjacent neuron. This is a neuron, this is a neuron. So that junction, these are dendrites of sensory neuron, motor connector neuron, but there's a gap in between there. It will allow flow of impulses. We are going to look at that. But that gap is what we call the synapse. So up to this point, we can just review some few things about what you have learned. So some few questions, one or two. One of the question is, name 3 types of neurons. Name 3 types of neurons. Now that one is very easy question. We have already found out that we have one called sensory neuron. We have another one in between connector neuron. And then we have motor neuron. The other question, what differentiates neuron from other cells? Neuron or a nerve cell from other cells. At a lower level, you learned about a typical animal cell. It's an irregular in shape with a cytoplasm, nucleus, and several other organelles, mitochondria, Golgi bodies, and several others. But the neuron here is slightly different from other animal cells. So what makes it different? Remember, we have said it's a specialized. When we were defining a nerve cell, we said it's a specialized cell, but it has some structures that makes it different dendrites. cell body, and axon. So those three features makes it different from any other cell. So we can, as a note, say it is a specialized cell with dendrites. Those projections from cell body and either at the terminal or receptor end of the neuron, axon for now transmission of nerve impulse, and a cell body for controlling activities of the nerve cell. Then the last question that you might do at your own time or through research on the internet or in your library is this. Question number 3, compare sensory, motor, and relay neuron. So you're going to use a table where you'll have a feature or the characteristic you are looking for in these 3 neurons. Then you'll put here sensory neuron. Another column will be of motor neuron and the other one of relay neuron. So you'll be putting your characteristic that you want to look through the 3. A very good example, you can look at myelin sheath. Put your myelin sheath and then say something about myelin sheath in regard to sensory neuron, motor neuron, relay neuron. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson. We shall build up more on synapse because we want to find out how now the impulse will be crossing that gap between 2 neurons. So welcome already to our next lesson, not now, but some other time. Thank you.